Welcome to Human Risk, a podcast dedicated to the understanding of human behaviour as a risk. Here's your host, Christian Hunt.
Welcome back to the Human Risk podcast. In this series, I speak to people that can better help us understand human risk. Whether that's academics who study human behaviour and how to influence it, practitioners who work to mitigate human risk, or those who have fascinating insights about it. My guest this time sits very much in that third category. Dom Joly is many things. He's a comedian, a travel writer, and a columnist. He's also been a diplomat and a television reporter. He first came to public prominence with his TV series Trigger Happy TV that launched 20 years ago. Trigger Happy is a hidden camera show which has a fabulously surreal edge to it. I loved it at the time, and I'm delighted to report that, as with all good comedy, it stood the test of time really well. If you've not seen it, you'll find links to it in the show notes. And on the basis of that show alone, he'd make a phenomenal podcast guest. But since then, Dom's also become a travel writer and broadcaster. One of his books in particular, The Dark Tourist, has been a huge inspiration to me. It chronicles Dom's journeys to unconventional destinations like North Korea, Chernobyl, and Iran. I wanted to get Dom on the show because I think he's got a unique insight into people, whether that's in terms of the way they react to his anarchic comedy or in his experiences as a travel writer. I wasn't wrong. In our discussion, we explore a range of topics. We look at the way people react to the surreal situations his comedy creates and what we can learn from human behaviour and attempts to control it when travelling. We also put our minds to some of the dynamics we're witnessing in the world today and what that means for comedy and satire. Not only is Dom great fun to talk to, but he's got some really interesting insights into human psychology that I know you're going to love. A word of warning to any listeners with a sensitive ear: neither Dom nor I refrain from using fruity language. Purely in the interests of more effective communication, you understand. And a little bit of comedy, of course. So please sit back and enjoy a thoroughly enlightening conversation with Dom Joly. Dom Joly, welcome to the Human Risk podcast.
Thank you very much. Is this a risk doing this?
This is definitely a human risk doing this, but it's a pleasure to have you here. And there's so many things I want to talk to you about. And I'm sure we'll come on to the C word at some stage during our conversation. But
Cornettos.
If we, I fancy an ice cream actually, it'd be quite nice. And if we go back to the sort of start of your kind of public career, this idea of doing hidden camera shows is sort of, it's a tried and tested genre, but in a really bad way. And what you came along and went is, I think we can do something different with it. And what I find fascinating is you had sort of a clear view on the human psyche as to what might be funny. But secondly, what you could sort of get away with. And I'm intrigued as to what your thoughts were around putting the show together, the experiences you had on it, and why people let you get away with it in many respects.
Well, there's a lot of questions there. Hidden camera, growing up, I'd love to say that I made hidden camera a different thing, but actually I didn't, because the very original hidden camera, or candid camera, which started, I think, in the 50s, was incredibly surreal and interesting. And, they did weird psychological things, like they'd put a man sitting in a diner and he'd be microphoned, so everything he ate would be amplified in the room. Now, that's a very difficult thing to put on telly, a sound joke. Right. But also that's quite surreal, and they did lots of weird stuff. And I loved hidden camera from the moment I saw it. I think, hidden camera in a way, because again, I like to make that distinction between pranks, which, frankly, are sort of frat boys. And obviously I've done some stupid jokes, but hidden camera to me, if you're in comedy, is seen as the lowest rung, really, because If you're smart, you go and write screenplays or sitcoms. And I was like, well, why is that? Because actually there's something about hidden camera that's incredibly difficult. I mean, people always ask me, who wrote Trigger Happy? Well, no one, because you have to improv. Like, everything is made up. And literally, we didn't even prepare. We just put a thing on, and then I'd just try and make Sam laugh. So there's a lot of improv going on, and you have to read people, and you have to try and make a guess as to what they're going on. But the reason I did hidden camera was because hidden camera had just become this sort of bastard child, and it was things like Beadle's About and Game for a Laugh, which was okay, but it was just basically fodder and people basically finding someone's weak spot and then making them angry and then watching it. But what I really hated about hidden camera was the sort of reveal element. At the end, it was like, oh, look, there's the camera, and everyone's happy and they're in studio. And to me, I like the idea of a sort of almost alternate universe. Like we always joke, Sam and I, that the trigger happy universe where dogs were beating each other up and squirrels were raiding shops was just like not a whole level below normal life, but literally just bubbling under. So occasionally these lives coincided and you'd walk into a shop and there'd be squirrels raiding it. And then you'd walk out and think, did that happen? And that really was what Trigger Happy was all about. It was about inserting a sort of just a weird bit of surrealism into someone's life and also just trying to make ourselves laugh, really.
And the bit I find interesting is clearly, where you've got an identifiable individual as a member of the public, you have to get their permission.
Yeah.
Whereas you've got some of the sketches, and the one that first attracted me to Trigger Happy TV was the one where you basically turn up in a beat up car with a crash helmet on.
Yeah, I love that.
And you sort of appear at a cab rank shouting minicab.
Yeah.
And then just sort of drive off. And so in that situation, people, you haven't gone through that process of asking for anyone's permission, presumably, because it's just a group of people that and so there's an interesting thing where you'll never guess what happened to me today. There was this freaking lunatic that for me is kind of really entertaining because you've created that surreal world and you haven't kind of broken the sort of fourth wall.
I agree. I kind of hate that breaking of the fourth wall when you had to, obviously, if I go up and talk to someone straight one-to-one, they're very identifiable. I think it's only fair. You can't just whack them on telly. But often they were very happy. Most of the time they were just happy that there was an explanation for this weird thing that had happened. But it kind of ruined it for me because in the old days when I first started, I didn't get any permissions, and I'd do weird things and some guy would go. I just love the idea of a guy going home at night and his wife saying, "How was your day?" And they'd say, "Fine." Actually, no, it was a bit weird. This scout asked me for his homoerotic dancing badge. But that one you pointed out, I absolutely loved. And then the reason it worked, that was at Euston Station. And I knew there was always, when you come out of Euston Station in London, you go downstairs and there's a sort of under ramp. And there was always this massive queue there of people waiting for cabs to turn up. And there were never enough cabs. And hidden camera jokes work best, I think, when people when they're believable, And basically, this was pre-Uber, obviously, but mini cabs were, you could either take a black cab and it would cost you 25 quid, or you could get into just a sort of random beaten up car for £9 where the man has just come out of Broadmoor. And so there was an element of believability to it. So I just thought I'll ramp it up. So we got a stock car. I just smashed it up. And then I put a helmet on. And you're supposed to only have black cabs come into there. So that, again, was annoying the black cabs. And I just zoomed in. And again, it was just so unsafe. Like, I think now if you're a proper production, you'd have to have an empty road. Everyone would have to be wearing high vis. I would have to go through 5 years of intensive stunt training. And literally, I just went in there and did a handbrake turn. And it could have gone terribly wrong. I could have wiped out the whole queue. But the joy was getting out. Because again, cabbies never really make much sense. And it was a bit of a joke on delivery men as well that kept their helmet on. And I'd just go, minicab. And what's great is you can see the whole queue. Because normally people are desperate to be the next to get in the cab. And you can see everyone in the queue just going, "I think it's your turn," like that. And it's great because everyone's just so British. And I love that kind of British reaction to it. And again, that is a very British reaction. If I'd have done that joke in America, one man would have pulled a handgun out. Another man would have called ICE and had me kicked out for being an illegal immigrant. It's very different reactions. But it's beautiful, that as well. And also what I like about that is I think it would work anywhere in the world when you're watching it, if you understood what minicab was. So if you just swapped it for taxi, it'd be amazing,
There was going to be another question I was going to ask you about. Is obviously it was filmed in the UK, and then I know there was a US series that, if I understand correctly, you weren't entirely happy with.
Fuck no.
And is there something about the British psyche that sort of one permitted you to do this? Because there's lots of situations where you sort of go, I'm surprised people didn't tell you to fuck off.
Yeah.
Sort of like you're coming and haranguing them in very weird ways, and we can the hassling the old people, which is really funny. Sort of accusing them of setting off fireworks, and I can see. But on the other hand, it's quite irritating and disruptive. And is there something about the British psyche that permitted that or made it funnier? Yeah,
there is. So I always think of us as a nation of grumblers and complainers, and sort of we're bulldog spirit. But actually the truth is we're incredibly, and actually it's sort of being shown in a funny way more and more politically, we're actually very submissive. were very, very respectful still of uniform. So the park warden, as an example, the park wardens don't exist. I mean, that's a Beano character. When have you ever seen, maybe in the 1950s, park wardens wore peaked hats and a blazer, but now it's a community ranger and a green sweatshirt, so I think, and so the joke with the old people in the park was that I was treating old people as though they were 15-year-olds. So all the things they were accused of were things that there's just no way they do. Handbrake turns, graffiti, setting off fireworks, and I love that. And what I loved about that particular sketch was, firstly, as I approached them, I could almost sense them going, oh, good. They've got a proper man. He's dressed nice, It's like, and then it was, I'm glad that they've got someone in the park, because, their view was that no one looked after the park anymore. Then when I started talking to them, I'm very polite, and they kind of like that. And then there's a sort of half thing. There's oh my God, we're being accused. No one likes being accused of, doing something you haven't done. But sometimes you're so clear that you haven't done it that you can almost enjoy it, because you think, well, there's no way that I'm going to be pinned on that. But also there was a tiny part of them that quite liked the fact that people still thought they had it, that they still, because people get ignored when they're old and they get forgotten. And I think there was particularly one gang, and they were a gang. There were 4 of them sitting on a bench, and I lift up a fire extinguisher and go, which one of you set this off? And they're all chatting away. And you can imagine them 50 years before thinking, yeah, go on, why not? I don't know, I just thought, I love that whole, everything about that. The fact that when you go into an English park, there are only 2 people. There are drunks and old people. I'm not going to pick on drunks. And the old people are all just sitting around and a bit forgotten, really, and no one really talks to them. No one's interested in them. So I think if I got any flack, well, I got a lot of flack for Trigger Happy, but a lot of people did misunderstand that and said, oh, he just picks on old people. I mean, I'd never pick on anyone that was not compos mentis or whatever. These people were completely there. And when I told them afterwards, God, they found it hilarious. They loved it. And they were going, I thought you were going a bit crazy. And then others would say, oh, because there is a chap over there that I thought might be capable of that sort of thing. I thought it was just gloriously British. But to get back to your question, the psyche thing, what I learned in England, there's lots of things. Like, one of the things I learned doing Hidden Camera is take control of a situation. And we used to call it the bank robbery syndrome. There's a theory that if you rob a bank, often people go in and fire a gun in the air, and that focuses everyone's mind, and you sort of almost have control over them. And so what I always tried to do, because Sam was always wandering around with a camera, and the last thing I wanted was them to spot the camera. So people tended to be respectful of authority. I think I have to say, because I'm sort of posh-ish, and I had a background doing journalism and stuff, I had a sort of authority, which I think people, there is definitely an element where people listen to people. That's a very British thing. Whereas in America, if I did stuff in America, which I did do, the big mobiles are an example. Because one of the big problems of being British is we fear embarrassment. It's what all comedy is about. Fawlty Towers. It's about just not, just you'll lie and build a web of deceit to not be embarrassed. You don't want to be pointed out. If something's happening on a tube, you'll ignore it unless literally someone's about to knife you. You'll just ignore it. Right. And that Trigger Happy played a lot on that, because Trigger Happy was not about getting reactions. Game for a Laugh, Beatles was all about, let's see if we can get him more and more angry. To me, when Trigger Happy first came out, I actually got a lot of flack from people going, but these people don't react. And that, to me, was the point. It wasn't about making them look silly. It was more about a sketch show that was happening in the real world. So really, I just wanted them to sort of be, needed to look real, because it was real. And it only worked for me when we went to America to do stuff. And like when I do the big mobile in England, everyone's like, oh my God, awkward, someone's shouting, oh, he's a nutter, and everyone gets very quiet. You do that in America, everyone goes, shut the fuck up, buddy. I'm literally pulling guns and stuff. So I think it's an inner reserve in Brits, a sort of don't make a scene in public. And literally, I'm constantly making scenes in public. A fear of embarrassment, a deference to authority and to sort of poshness. It's a very complicated bag, but I think all of that goes into it. And of course, I've never intended to put that across in Trigger Happy, but I think in the end, from Trigger Happy, you do get this sense of Englishness or Britishness in the reactions. And also the thing I really got across was we're actually a very decent country, or we certainly were then. everyone was incredibly helpful and would go way further than I would to help a moron like me doing stuff. So I thought it was a very positive show in that sense.
Yeah, and I'm struck. I mean, you filmed a few scenes, and I'm going to get the city. I think was it Amsterdam or Bruges or somewhere on Bruges, the canal?
I did a lot in Bruges, yeah.
and you were sort of you were tolerated there as well, from what I could see on film.
To be fair, Bruges, Belgium, and well, I mean, firstly, we used to own Bruges, so it's sort of technically British. But Belgium has the same sort of attitude, really. I mean, the French are very different. The French have a kind of, and a lot of my humour comes from a French sensibility, because I grew up in Lebanon. All the stuff I watched was French. And the French just have a sort of slightly more anarchic spirit, and they will do stuff like this, just what Sam and I used to call for the beauty, not for filming, just for fun. And the Belgians are quite dark, and, you know, Bruges is a very strange place. There's a curfew, it appears, after 6 o'clock, no one's out. So really, everyone in Belgium just kept themselves to themselves. You get the feeling in Belgium that everyone is hunted by the police and really just don't want to put that attention to themselves. But I love Bruges. It just looks so good, you know. Oh,
it's a stunning film set. And as you say, I mean, it feels like someone's built a theme park.
Well, it is, yeah.
You're allowed to roam during the day.
It's another of those places that people call Venice. You know, it's the Venice of the North, Bruges. But no, it's beautiful. I fell in love with it.
And it strikes me as well, if I look at sort of British exceptionalism, I mean, we are, particularly at the moment, we're kind of, you know, we travel the world, and I'd like to think that I try and respect foreign cultures, but clearly there's an element of me sort of, I know that in majority of countries, someone will understand my language, which does not apply to large swathes of the rest of the world. Mm-hmm. And they sort of go, as British, we'll let them get away with it. And so we have embarrassing politicians who go and do stupid things in Brussels, for example. And they sort of, it's almost like it's accepted. That's the British thing.
I think it is. I mean, one of my big travel rules is try not to travel anywhere where Brits go. I mean, if a plane from Britain goes somewhere, I tend to not enjoy it, because we don't travel well. And it is an exceptionalism thing. I think part of that is from the fact that I think there's a hangover from empire. We still sort of feel we own everyone. And there is that thing that everyone speaks our language. So if there's a problem, don't try and learn theirs, just talk a bit louder. It's very odd. And then we do have this extraordinary link to alcohol, which, you know, I did a show, I went around the world investigating cultural attitudes towards alcohol, getting drunk. And I went to a place like Russia where the whole country is institutionally drunk. You know, when Gorbachev tried to ban vodka, they used to start stealing perfume and drink it from the thing. I mean, this place they don't have bars in Russia, really, because they don't have time. They just neck a bottle of vodka and pass out. But there isn't that violence. And we have this just longing to fight. And, you know, it goes back to Shakespeare's time. It was talking about a country of beer and stuff. And the only thing I think it comes back to that fear of we're slightly repressed and we're very awkward. And I think the only time we either have sex or fight is when we drink, really. And that's what happens. So when we go abroad, we get very excited. And no, it's horrible. I used to tell everyone I was Brazilian when I travelled. No one hates Brazilians. I
mean, your career sort of brings us nicely onto the sort of the I would say the latter half of your career, but I think it's, you know, you've just sort of followed a natural path for you, which is you love traveling. And there's a great quote I read in your book, which was, you know, something along the lines, if someone's prepared to pay me to go somewhere, I'm on the plane. And I love that mentality.
I definitely have an issue. I have a problem with saying no to things, but certainly when it's travel, it's like there is nothing more exciting to me in the whole world than that moment when you step off a plane and you're hit by the wall of either heat or cold or just newness. And, you know, I've been to over 100 countries since I've done Trigger Happy, and it's the most exciting thing in the world.
And one of the things that you bring out in your writing is around sort of different customs and processes. And one of the things I did want to talk to you about was those weird forms that you get when you travel to other places. Where, you know, the US one that used to get me was, how were you involved in Nazi Germany? Right? And the absurd question one, it rendered it even, that looks normal relative to, are you coming here? Are you planning on committing terrorist acts?
But what's great is it's actually a yes or no question. And I'm just wondering if anyone in the billion people that have ever traveled to America goes, fuck, yes, okay, you got me. Yes,
yeah, I wasn't going to tell you, but now that you've asked.
I did run Dachau, and I'm now here to blow up a building. It is extraordinary. One of the things I've learned when you travel, those immigration forms are deeply irritating, because you get basically the more, frankly, shit a country is, either economically or politically normally, the more detailed and complicated their bureaucracy and the longer those immigration forms are. And you just know that sort of by the level of the more bureaucracy there is, the less chance anyone's ever going to process this form. I always sort of had it in my mind that whatever the form you filled out and you gave in, it'd be fired through a chute into a room, a massive room the size of 6 gyms, and there'd just be a cage in the middle with a monkey staring in a suit, and all this paper floating around, and occasionally he'd just grab one and eat it. And that literally is the point of it. I mean, whoever registers these things? My favourite one ever was I went to North Korea, and it said, what did the one say? I can't remember. It said, are you carrying, that's it, yeah. No, are you carrying knives, guns? And then he just gave up and went, killing devices, which I thought was really nice. And then it said, you're not allowed narcotics, alcohol, or exciters. I was like, what the fuck's an exciter like that? But I sort of collect those great ones. They're amazing. But
it is, as you say, it's really interesting. There was actually, incidentally, I did read there was a British lady, there's a surprise, who ticked the wrong box on the terrorism thing.
Oh, amazing. The first one.
Who was then banned from travelling to the US. So they did pick that one up. I think this was recently where it's digital, so maybe there's a computer that can actually analyse some of the stuff.
Computer says Nazi, basically.
Right, yeah, exactly. So we've got enough of those already. Yeah. But it's a fascinating thing because we are, back to your compliance piece. If I look at travel, there's 2 bits to it to my mind. There's bits where you have to be super compliant and follow the thing because there's trouble in not doing that. And then there's sort of free spirit and having fun. And I hate the bits of travel that are around that I'm being told what to do and organised.
Oh, don't we all?
Because for me, the benefit of travel is freeing your mind.
Well, the whole point of travel is to get out of your comfort zone, go somewhere awkward, learn something different. And so the concept of package tourism or coach tours or following someone around with an umbrella just seems completely pointless. And the reason I have done my sort of travel, sort of dark tourism and weird travel, is because to me, the world's become more and more homogenized. The whole point of travel is to go somewhere completely different, out of your comfort zone, speak different languages, get freaked out, don't understand what's going on and try and learn. And more the world's become globalized, homogenized, till it's very difficult really to go anywhere where you're not 500 meters from a Starbucks. And ironically, the only place really where you can travel now and it's unsullied by tourism, unfortunately, happens to be places that are either incredibly politically unstable or run by hideous dictators, which is why I go to these places. And it's terrible because, supposedly these are risky places, but actually there's nowhere safer in the world than going to North Korea or Iran because they're dictatorships. I mean, these places just, unless you're going to stand up and have a big sign saying, I hate the Ayatollah, you're going to be absolutely fine. You're in much more danger. I always joked. I mean, I've been to all these weird, dangerous places, supposedly, and everyone always says, where's the most dangerous place you've been? And I joke, but it's true. I'd say pretty much any British market town at kicking out time at 11 o'clock. And it's true. I'm much more nervous standing in Cambridge at 11 o'clock with gangs of drunks wandering around looking to headbutt someone than wandering around Tehran at midnight. There's no problem at all. And it's not a joke. I mean, we are a dangerous, horrible place. And God, the States now, I mean, God, if I was black, I wouldn't go anywhere near the States. I mean, it's totally out of control.
Yeah, I just insane. But I think that there is that strange risk perception thing. And I've followed in your footsteps in a number of places because I just sort of, I'm curious about what's going on. And I think there's nothing better than going to see it for yourself and experiencing it. But there is this misperception and people kind of go, why would you do that? It's very weird and very strange. And part of me goes, I love the fact that they do that because I don't want everyone going there.
Well, that's exactly my point. And also it's a great way of actually because people say, oh my God, that must have been dangerous. And you go, yes, but I'm rather brave, thinking I just had an amazing time and you weren't there. So you're not only having a unique experience, but you come back and you sit in the pub and everyone goes, that's the bloke went to Iran. He's incredibly brave. And you go, yes, I am. I fear nothing. Thinking, I just had a fabulous time. I went skiing, So it's great. So I'm a sort of, I'm a blackguard and a coward, really, who likes going off to places that sound dangerous but aren't. The only place that I have been to that genuinely was way worse than I thought it was going to be, and actually I was totally out of control was the Congo. And there's two Congos. There's good Congo and bad Congo. I was in technically good Congo, Republic of Congo, compared to the Democratic Republic of Congo. And by the way, any country that starts democratic is just not democratic, and it's shit. German Democratic Republic, the Democratic Republic of the People's Republic of North Korea. No. So no, Congo was out of control.
I went to Chernobyl as you've done, and I want to explore the parallels with coronavirus in a second. But that was really funny because it's really dangerous. And actually, there were some guys I went on the tour with who were quote unquote in the industry, Americans, had really sophisticated equipment, and it was. And then they were saying, you get greater radiation in the center of Kiev than you do at Pripyat. And as I was going through the whole trip, it was the most dangerous bit was on the way back when the coach driver went, "We will now stop for a drink."
Yeah.
And 2.5 hours later,
he waddles out with a bottle of vodka
when he's had a skinful.
Yeah.
I'm either going to stay in the middle of nowhere or I'm getting back on his coach and running the DUI risk. And so that for me is the most memorably dangerous bit of the trip. So I think there's this miscalibration of how dangerous things are.
Well, of course there is. And everyone wanders around Chernobyl with the Geiger counters because, they look good on telly and they buzz and stuff. But actually, if you wanted an effective thing, you have to do a dosimeter, which shows how much actual radiation you take in you, and actually you don't want to know how much radiation you've taken in you, so you don't get a dosimeter. My favourite bit at Chernobyl was when the thing happened. They put this thing called the zone of alienation, which is the 50-kilometre ring around Pripyat and Chernobyl, and everyone was moved out, and that was just supposed to sit there empty for ages. And two things happened. Firstly, a lot of old people who lived there moved to Kiev, and they left their houses and had to move into apartments or share, and they were so unhappy. And in the end, they thought, you know what, fuck it. I'm either going to live in a shithole in Kiev, I'm only going to live for another 5-10 years, or I'll go back in. So they started sneaking back in. So as you're driving through the zone of alienation, and it's supposed to be this deserted nuclear wasteland, you suddenly see this old, woman wandering out of her house, pulling carrots out the ground and waving at you. But my favorite thing was, as you come in, there's a fence all the way around it. And there was a house. I remember literally the fence is here, all of wasteland is here. And there was a house there, like 2 meters on the other side. Family was sitting there completely happy. And you think, so it really was it's like our 2 meter thing with the social distancing. It's like, if I'm 198, is it going to be better? Like this family, I don't know if this family just felt, oh, phew, thank God we're on the other side of the fence. It was crazy. I love that kind of stuff. But I suppose you have to put a limit to risk something. You have to somehow define risk and try and give it physical things. But really, risk is an intangible thing, isn't it? It's right. Risk is what you make it, how you deal with it, how you think about it.
And there's an interesting thing, which is we codify risk. So we so speed limits is a good example. 30 miles an hour is probably not the right limit for anyone. There are some people who should not be driving anywhere near that speed. And for Lewis Hamilton, that's probably not the right thing either. And then it depends on circumstance. So we do a lot of sort of codification of risk. And I think that the 2 meter thing is a brilliant example where people sort of go, 2 meters, I know that. And they sort of, they can switch off because somebody else has calculated the risk. So to the extent that I want to be safe, I will just follow the guidelines to the letter, which is utterly idiotic because it's missing the nature of the thing that's there. But it feels kind of comforting.
Yeah, but people are stupid, essentially. And so they need to be given something simple. Someone said a 2 meter was an exact Richard Osman, the TV presenter, who's very tall. So I thought, well, that's quite nice. And in America, they're trying to give examples of what it is, which has made it even more complicated. But
I've heard you talk before about, and this resonated massively with me, with coronavirus and the radiation in Chernobyl and the sort of the invisible nature of it. And I was really struck by that. It absolutely resonated.
Chernobyl was the closest thing I'd felt in risk and in fear, because risk statistically, we all know that you're more likely to be hit by a bus than various things, but it's things that are sort of visceral that really make you worried. But actually, when I go to dangerous places, one of the reasons I don't find them that risky is because the risks are visible. Like, are there a lot of armed men in the street? Are there a roadblock? Are there things that you can judge and you can think, oh, this is getting a bit dangerous and I can take some action to counter it? What I found extraordinary about Chernobyl was that actually the risk was pretty minimal scientifically, but the paranoia when you're going around is extraordinary, and your tongue starts to feel metallic, and you think, is my tongue feeling metallic, or is that psychosomatic, which it definitely was. And, obviously everyone's wandering around with all their Geiger counters and dust is being kicked up and stuff. And your brain is just saying, look, I don't understand this. I stopped at O-level physics. Just get out of here. I don't think it's a good place to be. And actually, it's the same thing with Corona. Is that I felt exactly the same paranoia that I did in Chernobyl, and it's because it's not a tangible enemy. It's this, you hear about it, you're worried about it, and there's this sort of feeling that everyone else becomes the enemy. People can give it to you. People get upset if you get a bit too close. Someone's coughing in the park. You're like, oh Jesus, it's really similar. And actually, Trump started calling the COVID the invisible enemy, which is exactly what people call it in the Ukraine, called Chernobyl. So it was interesting that.
And I agree. And it's just this strange dynamic, I think, of, as you say, of never feeling like you're in control of what's happening. And I think we have this, we kid ourselves, right, that we can manage risk and we're in control of situations. Of course, we're not, right? There's random things that happen. And actually, as we're seeing now, society is incredibly volatile.
Yeah.
And we're heavily dependent on, things that look really stupid now that were historically deemed to be smart. So just-in-time supply chains.
Mm-hmm.
Let's have the least amount of equipment that we need because it's expensive to hold equipment, and we're suffering from that piece. So we're in quite a fragile world, and yet actually we delude ourselves that it's not fragile. And I think what's interesting is we're starting to see that exposed as we recognise the sort of the frailties of the human condition.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think the whole thing is it's kind of like it's the straw that broke the camel's back, isn't it? Everything was building and building, and really our whole world seemed to be built on minimizing everything, getting rid of people, computerizing more, using one person where you could use 10. And it's just, it's sort of cost cutting all the way, till you're really just standing on this tiny thread. And one thing happens and the whole thing collapses. And I do think people have been aware of that. People have been aware that we're very reliant on China, for instance, and we should be doing more stuff here. But unfortunately, I've been on too many reality shows, and I know what happens. Everyone goes, oh my God, when this is over, we're all going to change. We're going to be so different. We've been on such a journey, and I'm never going to take things for granted. And actually, 2 days after you've left the reality show, you're just back to usual. I mean, we're going to go straight back to the way we were before, unfortunately. We don't learn from history.
And that's really interesting, because I was laughing when you talk about journeys, because that's always the thing they have on those singing competitions.
Emotional journey, yeah.
Right, it's been a lovely journey,
yeah.
And it's sort of, and of course, in those cases, for some people, life does change. But clearly, as you rightly say, I mean, the sort of,
yeah, but those are scripted. That's the point. Those journeys and those emotional backgrounds, and then overcoming it to become something. Those are all scripted storyline narrative arcs. What happens when they then become famous and are thrown out? It rarely goes well.
And, I mean, the interesting is the word journey, right? Because we associate that with change. And of course, for you, literally, journey equals going somewhere. And that does bring change.
It equals excitement to me, yeah. I mean, I'm very restless. I've always been restless. I think because I think I grew up schizophrenic. I grew up in Lebanon as someone English belonging to England. But when I was in England, I was someone that grew up in Lebanon and grew up in a war. So I always had this slightly dual existence, and I always felt I was slightly floating above things and observing. Like in Lebanon, I was always looking at it from an English perspective, and in England, I was always thinking, God, you just don't understand how lucky your life is here. Like there are people living in proper fucking shit situations, right, and people were grumbling. So I don't know if that's helped, because it's very difficult to know because that's been my life experience.
Parallel universe,
right? I don't have a parallel universe to do it, but I definitely think that's something to do with the way I am, and so. I've always liked traveling. I've just had wanderlust. I wanted to be Tintin when I was a kid. When I was a kid, I had all Tintin's destinations on a map. In fact, I've got it right there. It's my map. I'll show it to you.
That's very cool.
Not very good for a podcast, but here it is.
I can see it.
Tintin's destinations on a map.
Genuinely, listeners, he's showing me a map with, yeah.
When I was a kid, I just said, I'm going to go to all those places, and I have.
You've done them all?
I've done them all now, yeah.
And so I saw you sort of thinking around, how you're responding to the situation, and you've been very active on social media in entertaining ways that sort of covered a range of. I'm going to show you my observations under lockdown. You've released a Spotify playlist, which I'm loving, by the way.
Yeah, it's called Songs to Get Us Through This Shit.
And and we'll put links to that in the show notes.
Yeah, that'd be great.
And the reason I'm loving it is, one, you have great musical taste, no question. I mean, mine's a bit more mainstream, and one of the things I think it's always been there is you clearly have a very cool record collection.
But that's the point. You see, it's not. I think my one skill in music is not the coolness, because I've got a lot of friends who've got cool record taste, but they're snobs. And what I've really hated is people when I really love a pop song and I'll put it on, and one of my cool music friends will love it and then go, "Who is it?" And I'll tell them. And if it's Will Young, they're like, "Oh, can't like it." And to me, I just think any song. And that's why Trigger Happy had such a great soundtrack, I think, because it went from Nick Cave to Jacques Brel to Kylie Minogue to weird Swedish pop bands. I just think all music is music, and like if it makes you want to play it again, then it's amazing. So I'm not a snob. I think that's my good thing.
But the bit that I find fascinating about that, you every day you're posting a new song, and then you get people saying things like, "You should have posted this one."
Oh my God! Okay, this is my biggest bugbear in the world.
I've deliberately pressed the button here, but I think you're really onto something, which is why I wanted to press it.
Oh my God, it's a massive bugbear, that. So I did a show called How Beer Changed the World. Very tough show to make. Went around the world.
Lots of research required.
With my friend Ollie Smith, who's a wine expert on Saturday Kitchen. And every time Ollie and we compared notes, would put on Instagram, we'd say something like, in Copenhagen today. And someone would say something like, either, like say I said I was in Paris, they go, "Oh, you should do the Eiffel Tower and you should go to the Arc de Triomphe." Or they'd say things like, "Toulouse is a lot nicer." And we go, "I'm sure it is, but I'm in fucking Paris." And in the same way where when I put songs up, I'll put a song up and someone goes, "Oh yeah, you should, that song's good, but this song's better." So I constantly am rude replying, just saying, "Well, then put it on your fucking playlist." Because I'm not a hospital radio doing requests. This is my playlist. And I actually, genuinely, I'm sure some people send me good songs, but I just refuse to listen to them. It's like, go fuck yourself. Listen to my playlist. And then if you put a playlist up, if I do, I might listen to yours. But that's the point of it. It's a very odd thing all the way across Twitter, that. And it's actually, even in the fame level, I was doing a show with Adrian Childs. I was walking across, I walked from Belgrade to Istanbul for a show called Pilgrimage. And we were laughing about, the worst thing is, if you haven't done anything on telly for a bit, the worst question, people come up to you and they say, they always go, "I was going to call one of my books, what are you up to?" Or "What are you up to now?" And it's very difficult to describe, because if you literally go, "Well," and you list things, people go, "Oh, a bit big-headed." But if you say, "I'm a butcher," they go, "Oh, isn't that terrible?" And the worst question is, "Anything in the pipeline?" So Adrian and I now, whenever anyone asks us, if anyone asks me in the street, goes, "Anything in the pipeline?" I go, "No, nothing." And then I just email Adrian and just go, "Can't!" But I don't know. That's a personal bugbear. But it is this odd thing that you put stuff up that you've chosen and people compete. That's what it seems to be. It's like, "Oh, that's good, but this is better." I go, "Great. So fucking go there. Don't tell me about it." I just don't understand it at all.
I'm not forcing you to listen to this, right?
Yeah.
But I think there's something interesting about you and your kind of you clearly you're famous and you are public, quote unquote public property, right? You put yourself out there on social media, and there seems to be an ability to sort of criticize, challenge, or question you that they wouldn't do. And I'm not even talking about the difference between social media and real world, because I know people do weird shit online because there's you can hide behind the screen. But there's a strange thing where you're sort of, I don't know, you become public property in a very weird way in topics where, you're not a politician. You're just, you've got an opinion like everybody else has. You state it, you're sharing some music. I kind of think it's a nice thing, right? Let's put a play, because you could have just kept the playlist to yourself.
I could, yeah. But I'm a show-off, and I do love people listening to good music, so yeah. Also, the reason I did that playlist, if I'm brutally honest, is because I've had so many people go, "Oh, I love the music in Trigger Happy. Who chose it?" I go, "Who the fuck do you think chose it?"
Because we had a massive production budget, and I paid for John Williams to curate.
So in the end, I just gave up. So I thought I'd prove to people that I do have good music taste, and it was mine. So that's really why I'm doing it. But yeah,
right. And this idea that coming back to this idea of sort of public property and people see. I mean, how do you cope with the trolling and the kind of
not well?
I mean, you seem to roll with the punches from what I can see.
Not well. My problem is, you know what? I mean, everything. I mean, it just depends what mood you're in. Like, if you're in a particularly bad mood and someone says something that really hits a nerve, then yeah, it does affect you. But really, I'm all right. I mean, my problem is I love an argument. I adore arguments. Like, my wife will just say, "Oh God, I long for road rage or stuff like that." I like watching arguments. I like arguing, and I like arguing on Twitter. Like, I mean, most trolls, 90% of trolls can't write the difference between your and your, which is just an essential thing.
Let alone YORE, which would be way beyond them. Right?
Yeah. So I like correcting. I like correcting trolls' grammar for a start, and they get angry about that. But the problem is, you're never going to win online, because really, what people are looking for is a reaction. I realised. Whereas for me, I'm just like, you've made a point, I'm going to have a point back, and then they're like, "Oh, just fishing, you're a bit triggered," you know. And I'm like, "Well, I'm not triggered, but you came on my page and you had a go at me, so I'm answering you." "Oh, touchy." I go, "Well, not really, but just if you said that to me in the street, I'd do the same." So I'm quite confrontational anyway, and I need to stop, because you're never going to win. Like, you can get rid of, you know, I've actually had people delete their accounts because I've ground them into the ground, but then you get another 100 coming on. So it's a Sisyphean battle, I think. Sisyphean, the guy that rolled the thing up the hill and kept rolling down the other side. So You're never going to win. But I don't know. I kind of love social media. It keeps me busy.
I think it comes in for a lot of stick for obvious reasons, and there's some terrible stuff out there. But it's also, I think it does humanise people, and it allows voices that wouldn't otherwise be there. And we're seeing.
Well, I agree. I mean, that's the real thing. Like, when you're banning trolls or stuff like that, is that really, even when Trigger Happy was happening, Trigger Happy happened because an area of technology got kind of widespread, in the sense that you could suddenly buy a camera which was good enough quality-ish, and you could just go off and film. You know, it was the start of the YouTube revolution. Whereas before, to get on telly, you had to have it was a very difficult thing to do. And I think in the same way, everyone has an opinion on Twitter, but then now you have levels, you have blue ticks, and things like that, and you have various things like that, which are extraordinary. But I do think there's something incredible about it. And I mean, for me, it's amazing, because most people probably have people they know. Whereas I've got, Twitter, I've got nearly 200,000 people I don't know. And so therefore they're incredibly varied. So when I'm traveling, I can arrive in Phnom Penh and say, "I'm in Phnom Penh, what should I do?" I get 30 people go fuck yourself, which is fine.
Which is an option, right, clearly?
It's definitely an option in Phnom Penh. In the 31st, we'll say, "Oh, you don't know me, but I'm a photographer, I live in Phnom Penh. This happened to me, and but I know someone vaguely." And they sounded like they weren't an axe murderer. And so I met up with the guy. It was amazing, like, gotten him, and so you can get, it's like a wisdom of crowds, really, sometimes. It really works. It's great. And actually, that's a very good way of assessing risk and stuff, because I can ask things like, when I was in the Congo, and I was in a particularly weird place, and I was saying, "Anyone on here, follow me, that's good on the Congo," and I got people, genuinely, like, world experts and locals saying, "Don't go there, do this," So it's an incredibly useful tool, especially when you're traveling.
Even if you had access to them, you can't tap in at the same time. And I think it's that interesting sort of citizen viewpoint, because I don't want to say we've had enough of experts, because I think that's a clearly ridiculous statement.
Well, that's the problem, because that citizen journalism thing, it's amazing, because the moment anyone says mainstream media or fake news or stuff, you just think, okay, you're a moron. But there is something about that. It's not news. That's the point. They're not trying to be news. It's just the way that you'd travel in the old ways would be, you'd find a guide, and the guide would know an old man who lived in the village, and they'd say, "How do we get to that monastery up there?" And really, Twitter, when it's used for travel, is like that. Someone will go, "Oh, I did that last year, and here's a photo of where I went, and you should do that." And that's amazing. And that's not citizen journalism. I mean, it is sometimes, if it's like, someone shooting each other today, "Don't come here," that's fine. But then when people start setting up their own blogs, you end up with Alex Jones and InfoWars, Toads going gay. So it's not good.
Right. But I think that crowdsourcing of opinions is interesting, because...
Well, it's the wisdom of crowds that's really is particularly interesting, because it is true that, it's about having that, and it only actually works normally if you're a public figure, because otherwise you will... I mean, even me as a public figure, I tend to have a similar sort of bubble of followers, and then the extremists who hate me, but there's not much in the middle, But that's what you want, is to have this absolute mix of people that, I would, if I wanted a plumber now, what do? You go on one of those websites, try and find a plumber who's recommended, or I go on here and say, is anyone a plumber? I don't know. It's really interesting now. It's something I wanted. My Facebook page, my personal Facebook page, I set up and just started doing, and it built and built, and I got to 5,000 followers, and it stopped. You're only allowed 5,000 followers on a normal Facebook page. So then I had to get a fan page I didn't particularly want, and that's now massive. But I've still got these 5,000 people on my Facebook page, and I wanted to do a show called something like Leading the 5,000 or whatever, and it was like using 5,000 random people to see if I could use them to, can I get to Venezuela? Can someone build me a raft of albinos? I don't know. It was like a really interesting concept of what you could do with 5,000 random followers.
You should do that. Now's the time, surely, right?
Oh, God. I mean, it's just, I've almost given up trying to get telly done. Telly is so boring. And also, to pitch to TV channels right now, if you're hot, then you can get anything through. And I did. And when you're not, it's almost impossible. And actually, TV really is dying. And I'm not just saying that because I'm an old grumpy person, but I just don't watch TV. I watch Netflix. I watch, to me, it's about going to those places. So, yeah, it'd be an interesting thing to do for something like Netflix, but not, some channel which no one watches. It's sort of not worth it, really. I could almost do more online than shows get on telly.
And I saw you've done a sketch recently, which I enjoyed. There's a Zoom-based sketch.
Oh, that's fantastic. That's the first comedy collaboration I've ever done. Yeah, with this comedy duo called The Pin, and they're very Radio 4, but actually they've really come into their own over lockdown because they do these. Everyone's on Zoom doing these kind of chats, and all their humour is based around that and the awkwardness and the weirdness of this new type of interaction. So I enjoyed that.
And but it struck me that sort of the awkwardness piece almost plays into your kind of earlier stuff. I mean, we talked about Trigger Happy and that sense of sort of it's slightly weird, it's not quite human, something's a bit strange. There's an element of that here, right, which is sort of social awkwardness and strangeness and odd dynamics.
Well, it's, it went on to things like The Office and things like that. It's known as cringe comedy. It's Curb Your Enthusiasm. And some people really can't watch it because it makes them awkward. I love awkwardness. I don't like making people feel awkward, but I love just awkward situations. I like throwing things in the air and see where they fall, really. And I like that. I think it's a really interesting. I like seeing how far you can push the bar without being offensive. And so I love that sort of thing. And then the whole Zoom thing is just weird. I mean, it's odd. There's everything from the moment when you leave a Zoom meeting and you press leave, and there's just 2 seconds of awkwardness where you're sort of frozen, and it's and I love the fact that there's this whole new dynamic of things that you can laugh about and communicate about.
And we're getting some interesting insights into people's personal lives, right? We can
into the backdrop. Yeah, I haven't given you I could give you my bookshelf. I could have gone for that if I was doing the news, but I've just gone for a sort of weird. I'm a prisoner. But obviously, you're only listening to audio here, so you're not seeing this. But we are actually, Christian and I are actually talking. We can see each other in this. So, yeah.
And I want to pick your brains on what's going on at the moment in the world and the sort of weird stuff that's happening. And you, like me, are massively exercised by incompetence, bullshit. There's a whole load of things there that you go sort of even just a year ago would have seemed unlikely and unacceptable that suddenly have become the norm, and let alone 10 years ago.
Well, it's just nastiness seems to have populism. I mean, it comes down to several things. It comes down to media. Fox News is responsible for pretty much, and in a funny way, I'm not rabidly anti-Murdoch. I've written for papers like that, but there is definitely an element where, if you find someone angry and you give them someone to blame, and you just force feed them that, it works. And one of the things I never understood, for instance, about Brexit was where this pathological hatred of the EU came from. People just utterly obsessed with it. And then I realized I don't read The Sun. I don't read tabloids. I don't read the Daily Mail, don't read Daily Express. But if you do read those papers, for 20 years, you've been absolutely force-fed the Bendy Bananas story, the criminals coming over here and getting that. And so you can see why people got angry with that. And then, so that was fake news, if you like. That was the original fake news. But I think where things really got weird to me was I can totally see why politicians have become so dull and sort of white bread and, there used to be a proper choice of politicians. And now, why would you be a politician? Because you just get ripped apart. If you've done anything interesting in your life, the media will find it and take you out of it. And so really you get some very average, dull people being politicians. And people just think, no one's actually saying anything of any particular worth. No one's representing us. So I can see why America got to the stage where they were just like, you know what, for fuck's sake, I just want someone out of the ordinary. But then the fact they chose Trump, of all people, to represent the common man is quite extraordinary. But Trump's genius is he realized it's like that thing where someone says, if you asked every woman you met in the street to sleep with you and you had no fear of the word no, 1 in 100 would probably say yes, and you'd crack on. And Trump sort of realized that actually all the old conventions of like decency, truth, if you just don't give a shit about it, it just disappears. And he's like a conspiracy theorist that however crazy your conspiracy, you're a flat earther, you go, okay, well, let's just go out in a boat and see if we fall off the edge. And they'll go, but you're one of them. You've organized it. You've always got someone to blame. And it's insane. And he's literally just set up a situation where if anything goes wrong for him, he goes, that's fake news. And we're so tribal now that I just think we're fucked. Anyway, I hate talking about politics too much, but because I know I sound like a, celeb Ramona or whatever. And I'm really not. When the first idea for Brexit came up, my initial reaction was, I think we should leave. I used to work for the EU. I was a diplomat in Prague, and it's a very corrupt, massively fat bureaucracy. But overall, it was there to keep Europe peaceful, and it is. I think it's overstretched, and I think it needs reform. But us leaving, it's just turned us into this hideous tribal society.
Right, but I think and I agree with you. I mean, I'm sick to death of sort of some extremities. But as a sort of exercise in human behaviour, I mean, we are living in fascinating times. I mean, some of the sort of the things that we see going on, all worlds come to life in many respects. I'm particularly want to pick up the sort of the idea of satire, because like what was ridiculous is now happening on a daily basis. I mean, we've got absurd stories that are being peddled that the person, and you look at a sophisticated level, you've got they know it's ridiculous.
It's got to the stage where, firstly, the whole social media thing is a big problem as well, because you tend to reinforce your own viewpoint by following people you like, and in the end, the algorithm just gives you repeats and echo chambers of your view. I'm probably. I try and follow people I hate to try and balance it out. But you do end up just being given things that affirm your worldview, which is not healthy anyway. But even worse, so news becomes, well, look, it said so there, and it's on a news channel. It says news. But we are, minutes away, really, from being able to take, in fact, people have already done it. Take Obama, for instance, and just manipulate his mouth. Yeah, and show a clip that just says, I hate Negroes or something. It is... So really, that idea that there's trusted news, it's the death of experts. That whole thing is insane. Of course, you need fucking experts. But America's always been America was born on being anti-establishment, anti-elitism, and experts are seen as being elitist. But what's so extraordinary is the people telling us this, from Nigel Farage to Trump, are fucking elites. They're just a different elite. It's very weird. I get it, but it's crazy.
And what's your perspective on sort of satire? How the hell does one respond to this?
Well, how do you satire anything? When, art, I've always thought it's very difficult to satirize art. There's almost nothing you could do that actually wouldn't win the Turner Prize, so it's sort of impossible. When Spinal Tap did music, really, there's nowhere to go from then on. There's no point doing music anymore because Spinal Tap did it. And, satire originally was a way of sort of challenging the establishment when you weren't supposed to, really the establishment was untouchable. And the first time that Harold Macmillan came and sat in the establishment club and saw Peter Cook do stuff, that was incredibly scandalous. And then it grew and grew, not 9 o'clock news, and then Spitting Image, which was incredibly effective in satirizing what was going on. And then I think now we've just got to a stage where you couldn't satirize it. Just one day in Trump's life of what he did and says, you pitched that in a satire thing, he'd say, I think it's a bit much. I don't think it's very believable. I don't know. But I certainly think we need I don't know if we even need it now. I mean, I was just thinking, I was watching Cummings come out of his house, and I think, God, in the old days, I'd be straight down there. I could work out exactly where he lived, and I'd set up a whole lot of things for him when he came out. But actually, I ended up feeling sorry for Cummings because he's being booed, and he's like in the stocks. I mean, the guy's an unpleasant sociopath, but we're being as bad as they are. I don't know. I think satire sort of... all of politics is satire now. I don't think there is. That's why there isn't any good satire.
But there's something interesting in what you were saying around the right to challenge. Because if you go back to medieval times with the court joker or the jester, right, that's a risk management tool, right? So nobody's allowed to criticize the monarch. So what I do is I permit somebody to do it in a manner.
It's a release,
right? But it's also a way of keeping you in check, right? So your court jester can point things out to you that nobody else is allowed to point out. Now, if they push it too far, they get executed. But it is a risk. But But it is a risk management tool to an extent that sort of says I accept a bit of challenge.
Well, it's like the guy that used to lean behind the emperor and say, "Remember, you're mortal." It's the same thing, really. But it's also a way of, it's like that in a way is a bit like Trump saying, I've got a sense of humor, but then only putting on someone absolutely terrible who won't say anything against Trump. I don't know. I mean, humor's very odd anyway, and because. Humour's subjective anyway, but humour has become very politicised now. So it is an odd thing. For instance, there aren't many funny right-wing comedians. I mean, it's just a fact. Now, part of that is probably because the comedy establishment is quite left-wing. So do they give right-wing comics a chance? I don't know. It's an interesting question, that. Why aren't there many right-wing comics? I think it's probably because, well, maybe there are funny right-wing comics and right-wing people find them funny. I don't know. It's very odd. I mean, I'm a centrist. I'm not left-wing. So I'm hated by both sides. So I don't know. But
it does come down to encouraging critical thinking. So if I go back to the start of our conversation, one of the things that people ought to be doing as you approach them in weird situations is going, what the hell is going? This looks a bit unusual. I'm going to be on my guard. And I think if you look at what satirists do at the moment, and there's that lovely Matt Lucas thing where he does a short version of Johnson's speech in the right accent that basically destroys it. That I think is a very powerful way, far more powerful than journalists sort of dissecting it with. It literally just shows you in a way you understand it. You sort of go, this is kind of, and you've got Sarah Cooper who's doing the the Trump monologues in a different environment.
I love her. Yeah.
And I look at those things and go, that cuts through because it's dissecting. So it's providing a really powerful challenge, encouragement to critical thinking that we're not getting from other fields.
But I think what's interesting about those two is they're not. I think one of the problems, and I suffer from it as well, is like, you just want to hear a comedian, you don't want to hear his opinions. And actually those two, with what they're doing, they're literally just regurgitating the actual words spoken by either Boris or Trump. So you can't really argue with it. I mean, what are you saying? They're not giving anything. They're just pointing out that in any other context, these are the words of insane people,
And I guess, context matters quite hugely. And that's one of the bits that, if I look at...
Yeah. Well, that's what's brilliant about it. If you take it out of the presidential bubble, it's just nonsense. I mean, you'd lock someone up if you found them talking like that.
I think on that note, I'm going to say thank you so much for appearing. Your tour that you were due to be doing has been...
Well, I was doing.
Oh, you didn't? Right.
I was doing Dom Joly's holiday snaps, and then I was like the Cheltenham Festival. Should I have been banned? I was a little less of a risk numbers wise than Cheltenham Festival, but not much. And I feel that when my tour comes back, which is now looking, I was rescheduling it to the end of this year, but I think actually now realistically it's going to be the end of next year. I will certainly have no problem with social distancing in my audience. I've always insisted that there's 3 empty seats between each person in my thing, so it's fine. But genuinely, I'm not a live performer. I've never done it. I did one big tour in 2010, which got panned, and it should have done because it was not thought through and it was not my comfort area. But this tour, I've really enjoyed it because I've tried to tie together sort of what we've been talking about, how I have people that know me for Trigger and I know people who know me for travel writing. And often people are like, why is the squirrel guy in North Korea? That doesn't make sense. And the whole point of this was basically showing me growing up in Lebanon, loving Tintin, thinking what I wanted to be was a diplomat or a foreign correspondent, and then how I ended up into comedy and then off traveling. And it's basically my holiday snaps. It's lots of weird photos and clips of all the places I've been. And it was going really well. So I was so annoyed. But I think I've got a 90-day tour next year when this is all over, which I love. I love being on tour. So that'll be happening.
But I loved it because it's almost like it's what you sort of do. I imagine you sort of in an old age, old people's home, showing your slides to the captive audience, and it's lovely because
no, definitely. And this is when I went after the Yeti, and they go, "Oh, what a fucking lying turd!"
right.
I tell you what, though, human risk. If you want to talk about human risk, me going on tour because it was everything. I've never done live performance. I'm not a stand-up. Weirdly, for someone whose job is what my job is, it's a total fear. It's public speaking. And I've had to absolutely fight through that to do this. And actually, it's finally paid off. But that's a human risk.
Right. Yeah, well, because I think you put people under pressure, they do stupid things. And there's nothing more pressurized than that embarrassment piece. Particularly, I guess, when people have paid to come and see you.
Well, it's just everything else I've done, I'm someone else, So even when I'm crawling across the road as a snail, people go, "Don't you get embarrassed?" I go, well, if that was me crawling across the road as a snail with no cameras, then I should be in a mental institution. But because I know why I'm doing it, not at all. But when I'm on stage, it's me. And I hate being me because then I feel bare and naked and risky. I'm not naked, don't worry.
You could have a whole new audience there. You never know.
No, I don't think so.
Listen, thank you so much.
Thanks a lot. That was really fun.
On a personal level, inspiring me to think differently about stuff and to do loads of travelling I wouldn't otherwise done.
Great. I really enjoyed it. Thanks.
So that's it for another episode of the podcast. My huge thanks to Dom for appearing and being such a fabulous guest. You'll find links to Trigger Happy TV, Dom's books, his songs to get us through this shit Spotify playlist, and his tour when that resumes in the show notes. If you're new to Trigger Happy TV or you just fancy watching it again, then I highly recommend the watch-alongs that Dom hosts every Friday on Instagram, where he and cameraman Sam Cadman do a live commentary to the episodes. It really adds something to the viewing and is quite fascinating. Of all of his books, I thoroughly recommend The Dark Tourist, as well as his latest book, The Hezbollah Hiking Club. Links, as I say, to all of those and more in the show notes. If you're not already subscribed to the Human Risk podcast, then you'll find it wherever you get your quality audio content. If you enjoyed the show, please do leave a review and rating on the platform you'll listen to. It really does help. I'll be back with another episode of this podcast very soon, but in the meantime, stay safe and taking inspiration from Dom. In a world that's difficult, scary and often overwhelming, do try and find some comedy to help you get through it. Thanks again for listening.